Welcome, everyone. We are going to talk about school choice today, and I want to give an introduction to our panelists who are here to join us to talk about this very important issue. This is a hot issue. This is an issue that we're talking about not only in Texas, but we're talking about nationwide, and this ties into so many other issues regarding schools and books and libraries and so many other things. So just to start this off, I want to invite our panelists to come up one by one to join us. First off, we have Joseph Backholm, and Joseph is a senior fellow for Biblical Worldview at Family Research Council. And previously, he served as a legal counsel and director of What Would You Say at the Colson Center for Christian Worldview, where he developed and launched a growing platform that creates short animated videos answering common questions about faith and culture. He also served as a legislative attorney for 3 years and spent 10 years as the president and general counsel of the Family Policy Institute of Washington in Washington State, where he managed educational freedom and parental rights. He also led 3 ballot initiatives on marriage and gender privacy. He's a Washington State native, and he loves travel, sports, and whatever his kids are into. Please help me welcome Joseph Backholm. We also have Corey Deangelis. He's the executive director at the Educational Freedom Institute. Corey, come on up. Yeah, give him a good. Corey's a senior fellow at the American Federation for Children. He's also the executive director at Educational Freedom Institute, an adjunct scholar at the Cato Institute, a senior fellow at the Reason Foundation, and a board member at Liberty Justice Center. He was named on the Forbes 30 Under 30 list for his work on education policy and received the Buckley Award from America's Future in 2020. He additionally received the Future 40 Award from Maverick PAC in 2021 and the OCPA Citizenship Award in 2022. His bio is a long one. Help me welcome Corey Deangelis again. And then finally, we have no stranger to Texas Values Policy Forum, Rick Green, founder of Patriot Academy and America's Constitution coach. You know Rick is a former Texas State representative, national speaker, author, and radio host. Rick co-hosts the national daily radio program Wall Builders Live with David Barton. Rick is the author and executive producer of Constitution Live, and he's taking a selfie during the middle of his bio. Please welcome Rick Green.
He's on the end, so he's got to do the selfie.
I got to prove to my kids I was hanging out with cool people.
Well, you're with me, so that's an answer in and of itself. Gentlemen, thank you for being here. Of course, we're talking about school choice. And gosh, this is such an important issue, as all of you know. It's something that, if I can get my papers right here, it's something that is being talked about on a national stage. We know that it's just hot throughout the country right now. And of course, we often see those who oppose school choice. They have a strong anti-monopoly, antitrust attitude, except with one exception, and that is the urban school district, right? Because what they want is zero competition. And they want zero competition despite being the organization that's most entrusted with improving the lives of low-income children, despite being one of the entities which basically no one is happy with right now with current outcomes. And parents should be the ultimate decision makers when it comes to the best education for their children. In order to empower parents, we need transparency to school officials. We have to hold the education system accountable for the quality of education that it provides, and we have to remove barriers that limit where education can be obtained. So let's talk about that a little bit, and I want to start off just by asking you a little bit about your background. Joseph, let's start with you first. Can you tell us a little bit about your background and what first got you interested in the school choice issue?
Well, I'm an attorney by training, and I've been in public policy for most of the last 20 years in starting in the legislature in the state of Washington, public policy group. Now I work mostly with the Family Research Council in Washington, D.C., so on national policy. And really my interest in education is that I think it is the heart of darkness, is the monopoly. All of the things that we are dealing with culturally, the religious freedom issues, the gender issues, the marriage issues, even the crime issues and the family structure issues, so much of that can be traced to this monopoly that the government has had on education. And once you break that up, whether it's corporate America and legacy media and all the things that we like to complain about, all of those foot soldiers are being trained in an education system that most of them are prisoners in. Most of the country has no options, and that is the foundation of all of this progressive cultural rot that we're dealing with. So you solve that problem, you begin to solve a lot of other problems. So that's where my interest in it comes from. And I got 4 kids.
Awesome. Corey?
We got to stop sending our kids to Caesar and be surprised and act surprised when they come back as Romans. Voti Backholm. But look, no, I first got interested in school choice. I attended government-run schools in San Antonio, Texas growing up. But when I got to high school, I was able to attend a magnet school, which is a school of choice. And I was actually on the campus, same physical campus as my residentially assigned school. And it was a night and day difference. I felt like it was a big positive impact on my life. And I feel like more families should have access to educational options too. And the funding shouldn't be limited to going to government-run institutions. You should be able to take that funding to a charter school, a private school, or home-based education option. After all, education funding is supposed to be meant for educating children, not for propping up and protecting a particular institution. We should fund students, not systems. But I actually got into this as a researcher at the University of Arkansas, where my first study found that private school choice programs in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, led to a significant decrease in criminal activity. It's one of the longest term voucher studies in the program. We followed the students until they were about 30 years of age. So school choice is criminal justice reform at the same time, and it can lead to a lot of these social benefits that go way beyond test scores. And then I started doing think tank work. I'm now at the American Federation for Children, and we are winning all across the country on the issue of educational freedom right now, and that's something to be excited about. And as Governor Abbott said in January, this session coming up will be the biggest, swiftest, most powerful push for school choice in Texas history. So I'm optimistic and happy to be here.
Yeah, like Corey, I had multiple experiences as a kid. So I was homeschooled a big chunk of my education, went to a small private school, and then ended up graduating from a Texas public high school. And so we had a little competition even in our own family and experience. This is the reason I ran for the legislature 25 years ago. So school choice was my absolute number one issue. Ending property taxes was number 2. But I'm a believer that you're not going to solve the education problem without competition. It's got to be done. Frankly, if Joseph and Corey had been in middle school instead of elementary school when I was in the legislature, we might have got it passed. Because they would have already been incredibly smart and been able to come testify, and we'd have won. But anyway, it was 65% in Texas for school choice even back then. So my 2 sessions were 99 and 2001. We couldn't get a hearing. We couldn't get anywhere with school choice. So even with 65% of the state saying they wanted school choice, the teacher unions had a stranglehold on the legislature even back then. This will be the first time that we've really had the leadership in Texas push hard for it. So I do think we have a great shot at it, mainly because of the atmosphere and how it's changed. My 2 main reasons for it were just a believer in the free market, that any product is going to get better whenever you have competition. It's going to get worse when you don't have competition. You won't have transparency when you don't have competition. There's no reason for these school boards and these teachers and these groomers and everybody else to respond, because there's no hammer. There's nothing to force them, and nothing will force them better than saying the money's going to leave, and we're going to take the money and we're going to take it somewhere else. And Corey said it, but I mean, we have to care about the kids' education, not the name on the building. Shouldn't matter what the name on the building is. Shouldn't matter which school they're getting educated in. What should matter is what kind of results are we getting, and are they getting that education? So that for me was number 1. But number 2 is just the values issue. Once you get into the 1960s and 70s and the Ingle v. Vitale case and Abington v. Shemp, Murray v. Collette, and all these horrible Supreme Court decisions where they removed values from the education system and said, there's no right and wrong. Do whatever you think is right. And that became the new philosophy taught in our public education system. It became necessary to get more kids out of that. The more kids you get out of that system into any school system that is actually teaching right and wrong and teaching a value system, the better off the culture is going to be. So 1 was just a better product, and 2 was get them into a place where they can learn values.
I'm very reluctant to argue with Rick Green. But I don't think they removed values. They just replaced them with much worse.
See, I would have passed
values.
it 20 years ago if I'd have had these guys. You're exactly right.
I don't know, but I wasn't homeschooled, so I don't know if I can make the argument as well as you could.
Joseph, you know, a lot of entities have to be involved in school choice in order to make this work, right? And you've made the argument, and you've done some work that the church really has to be a primary and vital factor in school choice. And back in 2020, when we were all social distancing and stuck in our homes.
Wait, who's this we you're talking about?
It's the royal we.
All of us over there in D.C.
The Supreme Court came out with a case called Espinosa that really kind of opened up some of that. Can you talk a little bit about that and why the church needs to be involved?
Well, there's Espinosa, and then more recently, Carson v. Macon, and without boring us with the details, essentially what the Supreme Court said twice in a span of about 2 years is that if there are school choice programs that are created, you cannot discriminate against religious education, which is a great opportunity, which means here in Texas, when the ESA, the Education Savings Account program, is passed in Texas, that you will all be working very hard to make sure your legislature passes, that it's as robust as possible, that they don't nibble around the edges, that they go for the whole enchilada. So all the dollars that are currently spent at the local public school could be used at the local religious school. That means the same dollars can be used to either send your child to the local drag queen for education or send them to whoever your church decides to run your church school.
So what, you're saying if you like your public school, you keep your public school?
That's exactly right. Thank you, President Obama. If you like your public school,
For real
you can
this time.
keep it. But if you don't like your public school, you can use the same dollars and go someplace else. But that creates an opportunity, because what the Supreme Court has said, which is what most of the country has done for a long time, is, oh yeah, we have lots of choice, but the religious schools are all disqualified. That's illegal, and that's been very clear. So what has to happen is the churches have to seize the opportunity. And the churches have to see this as this is not about education, this is about discipleship. Between kindergarten and 12th grade, a typical child will spend 16,000 hours in a classroom. You cannot overcome 16,000 hours in a classroom by sending them to church on Sunday morning, and if you're really, really disciplined, youth group on Wednesday night. You cannot overcome that. And so the churches need to see this as a mission field. We need to create the infrastructure. One of the most unused assets in America is the rooms in the church Monday through Friday. Trillions of dollars of real estate that are left empty. We need to fill them with children being discipled and educated and trained by the church with the same dollars that would have been used training them down the street at Caesar's school. So that's why that matters.
Hear, hear.
Wonderful. Corey, you travel a lot, and I see you all over on, talking about school choice as an issue. How do you feel
You were about to say on Twitter, right? I see you on Twitter.
I see you on Twitter a lot.
The Texas American Federation of Teachers just blocked me a couple of weeks ago, by the way. I don't know why. I didn't do anything wrong.
Really? Tell us about that.
They're afraid. They're afraid because they understand that their monopoly on children's minds is about to end. And we will finally free children from their depraved clutches once and for all, and there's not a dang thing they can do about it.
It's incredible that someone would be afraid of that, right? But how do you think the political winds have shifted on
Well,
this
the
issue?
winds are at our back. I mean, look at what Joseph just talked about. We had 2 Supreme Court victories in 2 years, the most recent one being this year, in favor of parental rights in education, religious liberty, and school choice. That is something to be very excited about. But we've also seen so many states pass school choice legislation in 2021, so much that we named 2021 the year of school choice. 19 states enacted or expanded programs to fund students as opposed to systems. And then in 2022, just a couple months ago, Arizona just went all in and won up them all, allowing every single family, regardless of income, regardless of background, to be able to take their children's state-funded education dollars to the education provider of their choosing, whether that's the public school, charter school, or private school. And think about the Arizona case for a second. They did it with the slimmest of majorities. They have 1-seat Republican majorities in their House and their Senate in Arizona. And what did they do? They all showed up, voted for their party platform issue of school choice, and allowed every single family to have educational freedom. If they can do it in Arizona, they can do it in Texas that has much stronger majorities.
Yeah, and just to point out on that, I mean, that happened because Governor Ducey said, this is going to happen before I leave office. Right. And he put all of his weight behind it. It took that to make it happen. I mean, anybody that follows me knows that I have been a major critic of Governor Abbott over the tyrannical things that happened over the last 2 years. But if he truly gets behind this, not just with words, but with action, if he's actually all in on this, this would be a phenomenal legacy for Governor Abbott. It could change Texas for the better in a bigger way than anything that he's supported so far. It could be massive.
Yeah, this would be huge. I had a meeting with Governor Abbott pretty recently. I posted a picture on Twitter of us shaking hands, and the leftist media wasn't very happy about that, and the teachers' unions weren't very happy about that because they understand that means he supports school choice. And I believe him in the meeting. I believed what he said in January, that this will be the biggest push for school choice in Texas history. And I also believe him when he said in May at an event earlier this year that he supports allowing every single child to take that funding to a public, private, or charter school of their choice. So this is huge. The political winds have shifted. Look at the Republican primary ballot in 2022, earlier in March. 88% of Republican primary voters this year in Texas said they supported the school choice proposition. That's up, yep. I'll give you some more things to clap about. That's up 9 percentage points since they last put it on the ballot in 2019. So families have finally woken up. Look, and another thing is that we should all really give a round of applause for Randy Weingarten and the teachers' unions for closing the schools, because they inadvertently done more to advance the concept of school choice, homeschooling, and educational freedom than anyone could have ever imagined. Thank you so much, Randy Weingarten and the unions. Because look,
and Terry McAuliffe, you got to keep thinking Terry McAuliffe, the gift that keeps on giving. Parents should not be involved in their children's education. We appreciate him saying that.
Well, let's talk about that real quick. So, what other options are out there? This is for Rick, right now. What other options are out there for school choice? I mean, you have private schools, charter schools.
Yeah, and just one other quick thing on that, because I think it is what people saw, the Loudoun County situation, the girl getting raped in the bathroom by a guy, pretending to be a girl, and then just moved to another school where he could do it again. I mean, all of that stuff that happened in the last 2 years, what the enemy means for evil, God can turn to good, and I think that's what's happened here. It has awakened so many parents. So the wind behind our backs is 100% right. But we have to meet this opportunity. Pete Hegseth has this great new book, Battle for the American Mind, where his challenge at the end of it, I mean, most of what he says through the book, we've all been saying for years, and at Wall Builders we've been teaching for 30 years, that the removing God from the equation on our education was going to destroy the system, and it did. But his strategy at the end is fantastic. And it's exactly what you were saying, Joseph, about churches have got to step up and take advantage of this opportunity and not let their churches sit empty throughout the week. The private schools I went to were little churches that were willing to open up their buildings and turn them into schools. We're going to have more of that because there's not enough to meet the demand for all the people that now want a different option. And I got to say to the folks out there in our movement that have always been afraid of school choice, afraid of government dollars and all that, it's not government dollars, it's your dollars. It's your money that you are paying in. And all this fear about, but then they're going to regulate us. With the money comes regulate. Folks, they can regulate you tomorrow. I would always say this in the legislature. It's like, the only way you're going to stop regulation of homeschooling or private schooling is eternal vigilance. Every single session you have to be there to fight that, regardless of whether we pass school choice. So we should stop operating in fear. We've not been given a spirit of fear, but of power, love, and a sound mind. We have to think through these things, and we have to reason through it and understand how public policy really works. So we're going to have more choices, and that means us thinking strategically and creating more options. I'm obviously a homeschool fan. That's my number one choice. That's how we did our 4 kids. And so that's my first choice, and I hope that our school choice option includes money for homeschoolers as well. But we're going to have more private schools. I got to
hit on that too really quickly. Yes, we got to take the incremental victory. We got to take the W, or we're stuck with the L. I mean, the reality is 9 out of 10 kids are stuck in government-run institutions already, and they don't have a choice whether or not. But every single school choice program that exists in the country is about 70 many of them now, not a single one has ever forced any family to accept the funding or any school to accept the funding. Everybody should be able to make that choice for their own kids, and you shouldn't be able to tell other families who can't afford it that they can't make that choice.
Corey, you sound like you believe in freedom. You radical.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But look, there is another doomsday scenario that can play out, which you kind of hinted at, that the government can regulate private education already. In Oregon in 1922, they outlawed private education. 3 years later, thankfully, the U.S. Supreme Court, in a famous decision, not Zelman v. Simmons Harris, Pierce versus Society of Sisters, said the child is not the mere creature of the state. And hopefully some more people will realize that today.
In California, they outlawed homeschooling just a few years ago, basically by saying you had to be a licensed teacher, and then got it overruled. But they can do it anytime they want.
Yeah, they can already do it, and we're more likely to prevent that from happening if we can get a bigger coalition and make private education more mainstream with more people participating in it. That's another silver lining of the closures, is that a lot of people started to figure out homeschooling can work really well, and they had more confidence in their ability to do it. And the U.S. Census Bureau has estimated that homeschooling has at least doubled since pre-pandemic levels. So that's another victory, and people have said that they are now more favorable of homeschooling than they were to pre-pandemic. That would mean they're less likely to call for regulations in the future. And if we have kids if we send 50 million kids nationwide to government-run institutions, they're more likely to vote to regulate homeschooling and private education later on in life when they become adults. So let's not make perfect the enemy of the good. We can't miss the forest for the trees. We're finally winning on this issue, and don't let overthinking things get in your way. We can win this in Texas. It's going to take all of us banding together. For far too long in K through 12 education, we've only had one special interest. It's basically been the employee unions. Well, now we have a kids union. That is the parents. They've woken up and they're never going back to sleep, and I believe we can win this war that the unions waged on parents for decades and decades, once and for all.
Well, and I appreciate all of you guys being voices for this issue and just, helping people and helping this move in that direction in a way where we're ready. And I think that's one of the questions, right, is are we ready? And we were talking earlier, and then I read some of your stuff as well, Joseph, on talking about the secularization of the church and whether or not the church is up to that task. Talk a little bit about that for us.
My title with the Family Research Council is a senior fellow for biblical worldview, and George Barna is a colleague in there, and he does a lot of research on the church's worldview. There's a lot of data, but one point that I'll highlight here to illustrate the problem is in the last 10 years, there's been an increase in the nun category. What is your religious identification? There's an increase of 30 million people in America who identify as nuns. 78% of those 30 million grew up in the church. 78% of them. Which means, and what the data shows to bottom line this, is that the culture is doing a much better job of evangelizing the church than the church is doing of evangelizing the culture. And so many of us say, well, I want my kid to go to this school to be salt and light. And it is essentially playing Russian roulette with your child's soul, but you got 5 bullets in the chamber. It really is that bad. And because of that, and I kind of gave the speech already about why, just understanding the nature of the problem, of what's at stake with our kids. And some kids survive it, and I know some, but I know most do not survive that with their souls intact. And it's not just because of the bad curriculum. A friend of mine described it this way with respect to child rearing. It's basically, he described our children as little cucumbers that are being pickled. And the flavor of pickle that they will become is determined by the brine that they soak in, right? For years and years and years. And if you send your child into a place where vice is celebrated and virtue is mocked and disrespect is normal and respect is mocked, they will absorb the values and the loves and the heart condition of the environment that they sit in, even if it's not in the curriculum. Even if you manage to get all the drag queens out and you don't have the porn cartoons in the curriculum, they will still absorb things that are anti-gospel and will be damaging to their soul. And we just sit them there and that's just what they pick up. And we just have to understand how loves are transmitted, how hearts are shaped, and the environment that they sit in, the brine that they soak in has so much to do with that. And I know not every public school classroom is a threat to the soul, but most are these days, and we have to be so vigilant about what we're doing, and especially now that we have realistic opportunities all over the place, we have to do something different. 100 years ago, when the Protestants were running the public schools, the Catholics were like, I don't want my kid getting a Protestant education. So what did they do? They created a Catholic school system. When the pagans came and took over the public schools from the Protestants, what did the Protestants do? They just kept sending their kid, right? And that's what has happened to the church in America today. And we now know. Our eyes are wide open to what we're dealing with. It's just a matter of, do we care enough to fix it? I think the answer is yes, it's going to be some work, but there's no better work to do.
You know, it was just really incredible, some of the numbers I was reading. I was reading one of the papers that you wrote, and you were talking about how 90% of children raised in Christian homes spend 30 to 35 hours a week in public schools run by people who are a nun. You know, and that's just an incredible statistic. We are losing because we're outsourcing. We're outsourcing our children's education.
Their discipleship. We're outsourcing their discipleship, and we have to see it that way. They are being discipled. It's just a matter of whether they're being discipled by people we want them to be discipled by, or people who, in some cases, hate us as their parents.
Exactly. Yeah, and they have arguments too, right? They make arguments on the other side. So, Corey, I was going to ask you.
They're all horrible arguments.
What's one of the arguments that you hear all the time, and what's your response?
I mean, I could pick a random person from the audience and they'll know what I'm about to say, but their main argument is, well, if you allow for choice, well, then that's going to defund the public schools. And then basically my main response to that is, well, why would that happen? Why would giving families a choice defund the traditional schools? I usually get blocked on Twitter for that one because they have no good argument for it. They'll have to say, they'll usually switch arguments or block me because the only answer is, well, families aren't happy with what they're getting. And so that's basically them admitting that they're not, that they understand that so many families are stuck sending their kids to schools that either aren't aligned with their values or aren't doing a good job academically or in any other way. But my other response is that, look, the money doesn't belong to the government schools in the first place. Education funding is meant for the child. That should follow them to wherever they want to get an education. And then, by the way, they'll also try to argue that, look, this is public funds for public schools. Everybody's heard that, right? Well, there's no such thing as public funds. It's all taxpayer dollars. But the second thing is, well, then why do you support all these other initiatives that have public funds going to private institutions? Why do you support Pell Grants that can be used at private religious universities? Those are public dollars that can be used at private religious universities if you want. What about the pre-K programs or even the federal Head Start program? That's public dollars technically that can be used at private, even religious pre-K providers. The funding follows the decision of the family with those initiatives. Why is it only in those in-between years that you become all up in arms about public dollars going to private institutions? What about food stamps? Do we tell low-income families that they must spend their food stamp or WIC dollars at residentially assigned government-run grocery stores? Absolutely not. Instead, the funding goes to the family and they can choose Walmart or H-E-B or Trader Joe's or any other provider of the service. The same people who support all these other things all of a sudden want to talk about public dollars, public institutions, only for K through 12. And the reason for that has nothing to do with logic and everything to do with power. It's because 99.99% of Randy Weingarten's union, the AFT, of their contributions have gone to Democrats as opposed to Republicans in the latest 2022 election year. And that is a trend that has existed for the past 3 decades at least, according to the Open Secrets website. And so they're trying to protect the teachers' union monopoly at all costs and don't want to have any competition. And the reality is the public schools up their game in response to this competition. I don't want to destroy public schools. I don't think anybody on this stage wants to have negative outcomes in the public schools, especially when there's a lot of kids still going there. 25 of 28 studies have found statistically significant positive effects of private school choice competition on the outcomes in the public schools. So school choice is a rising tide that lifts all boats at the same time. But there aren't any good arguments. Look, the money's At the end of the day, the money is for the child, and they should be able to take it. If you like your public school, you can keep your public school. But if not, you shouldn't be trapped in an institution that raises your kid to hate your values.
And these days to hate themselves
That's,
and to hate their friends
Yeah.
and to hate their country.
and I want to expand on that a bit, because their defense of the public school is not like this just altruistic love of public education. Here's how it all works. It's a grift, because obviously the state legislature passes laws that fund public education that pays teachers. But the string attached to that in almost every state is the money that the teachers get. They are legally required to send a portion of their salary to the teachers' union. What does the teachers' union do with it? They give it back to the politicians, who make sure that the law requires that a portion of the money going to the teachers themselves goes back to the teachers' union. So they and the parents and the families are over here, right? The legislature, they grab the money, they bring it into this laundry where it just circles around and everybody takes a cut, right? The only people who aren't benefiting from this are the kids. They're the only ones not making anything from it. We do not have an education system. We have a teacher employment system. That is the primary goal of the system. And until we understand that, we'll think they really primarily care about the kids. It's not, oh, I love my public school. It's, I love my money. The politicians, the teachers, and the teachers' unions all get paid. The kids don't. That's why they lose until we break that monopoly.
And a lot of those same politicians don't send their kids to the public school system. I mean, there's this one state that has a group called I Love Public Schools, or I Heart Public Schools. The executive director sends her own kids to private school. You love the public school so much that you won't send your own kids there. We saw this with Joe Biden. He attended private school but opposes school choice and sent his kids to private school, which is great. Every family should have that opportunity, but you shouldn't fight against allowing less advantaged families to have the same kind of opportunities. School choice is an equalizer. The most advantaged are already more likely to have some form of school choice by living in a neighborhood that's assigned to a public school that you like, or being able to pay out of pocket for private school tuition and fees. So funding students directly allows more families to have educational opportunities. And just to piggyback on what you said, Joseph, that it is kind of sad that the education system has unfortunately turned into a jobs program for adults as opposed to an education initiative for kids. But it also doesn't really do a good job for teachers either. And I think school choice would benefit teachers too, because competition in the market for goods and services is good for customers and families and students, obviously. But competition in the labor market is good for employees at the same time. Their current employer, the district, has no particularly strong incentive to spend additional dollars wisely. So it goes towards administrative bloat, teachers union bosses who make over $500,000 a year, and towards red tape and handcuffing the teachers from being able to do and be able to teach how they want to teach. So school choice can benefit them. Look in Texas, over the past, or nationwide, since 1970, we've increased per pupil education expenditures by about 152% after adjusting for inflation. Teacher salaries have actually only gone up by about 8% nationwide. It's all gone towards staffing surges and administrative bloat. It's not making its way into the classroom. And the way that we do that is to give them competition so that they allocate additional dollars wisely. We've seen 5 studies on the topic that I've written about on a blog at the Washington Examiner called School Choice Benefits Teachers Too. All 5 of those studies have found statistically significant positive effects of private and charter school choice competition on the teacher salaries in the public schools as well. So this is a win-win solution. It's not, students versus teachers or parents versus teachers. It is everybody versus the teachers union bosses and the system.
There's another reason it benefits teachers as well, is because when you interject competition, no longer are the teachers treated like assembly line workers that are all paid the same. The worst teacher in the school district that's been there the same number of years as the best teacher in the school district is getting paid the same. It's absolutely insane. They should be able to, if you're a great teacher your salary should reflect that. There ought to be competition for you, and if the school district doesn't want you and a private school does, they're going to have to pay more. I mean, if they want to keep you and a private school's trying to get, the competition happens just like in the marketplace. That doesn't happen right now. So our best teachers are being taught the same as the teacher that everybody wants to get rid of, but they can't get rid of them because of the teacher unions. One more thing, totally unrelated, and that is that to those people that grew up in small towns where Friday night lights was an important thing to you, you've got to stop being driven by the nostalgia and the emotion of Friday Night Lights and start paying more attention to Sunday morning and the values that are being that should be taught in the community. Your school is not the same as it was 20 years ago when you went there, or when I went there 25 years ago. And so stop caring more about the football team and being able to cheer together on Friday night with your community, and start caring more about what those kids actually turn out to be. I just think that nostalgia thing I've seen, we've allowed all this chaos to happen because we just love our public school and we want to root for the Tigers or whatever it is. We got to get past that nostalgia and start looking at the end product.
You brought up the rural areas, so I got to bring up another argument we actually hear from some people who are on the right, is they'll say, look, in Texas, we have a lot of rural areas, and because we don't have a lot of private schools right now, and so we're not going to be able to use these kind of programs all that much. And at the same time, it's going to destroy our public schools, but that's our only option in this area. Can anybody see the inconsistency? I mean, has anybody seen that 2-button meme of the guy that's sweating? He's trying to decide which button to press. It's to illustrate someone trying to say two things that are logically incompatible at the same time. If it's true that you don't have any other options in your location and your public schools are the lifeblood of your community and they're doing such a fantastic job, it can't be the case that giving families a choice will destroy those excellent schools, because schools are funded based on how many students you have. If there's no other options, you're not going to lose any students. You should have the least to worry about when it comes to competition for those students. This is more of just talking points that come from the unions, and legislators sometimes repeat them without thinking a little bit about how these things are logically incompatible with one another. But at the end of the day, if your public schools are so great in your area, they shouldn't lose any students at all, and they'll have plenty of funding to cover costs. And another piece of that is that with these initiatives, typically about half of the total funding follows the child. In Texas, I want to say they spend about $13,000 or $14,000 per student in the government-run schools. You'd probably have about $7,000 following the student with an education savings account. What does that mean? If you lose a student and you only lose half of the funding on a per student basis, your public schools end up with more revenues and expenditures per student. It just has to work out mathematically that way. Just imagine if you stopped shopping at H-E-B and you went to Trader Joe's or Walmart for whatever reason, and H-E-B got to keep half of your grocery funding each week in perpetuity. I mean, it wouldn't make any sense, but I would say that would be a good deal for H-E-B. This is similarly a good deal for the public schools, that they get to keep any money at all for students they're no longer educating. And at the end of the day, in these rural areas, these are some of the deepest red areas, and this is a Republican Party platform issue. It is a top 8 legislative priority according to the Texas GOP. Let's get it done this session. Again, this is the best chance we have. Abbott is leading on the issue like I've never seen before, and I see so many people talking about it, and parents care about this so much right now because the government school establishment has finally overplayed its hand so much that they've awakened a parent revolution, the one that we've all been waiting for.
Rick, parents are an important part of this whole equation. Of course, you can't move this movement forward without parents and their involvement. What can parents do to plug into this issue and to get involved and help?
Is that for me?
Yeah, for you.
Sorry, I missed the first part there. Well, I mean, I think what they're already doing. I think the wake-up call over the last couple of years, even going to, listen, I went to my local school board just a couple of weeks ago, in addition to the state board with you guys, just a week or so before that, I went to my local school board because, and none of my 4 children, I never got a penny back from the $150,000 I've paid to that local school district over the years. We've never used any of their services whatsoever. But I went to testify against this ridiculous $500 million bond they're about to do because they're not factoring in that we very well may have school choice in just a few months, and they want to build all these buildings based on their numbers.
Did you see that superintendent here in Texas that was allegedly pressuring their employees to vote for a bond.
No.
I
Doesn't surprise me, but
I exposed that on Twitter, and there's currently an investigation open. I think we have Attorney General coming on after us, so maybe he could talk a little bit more about that.
Nice.
But look, they do these kind of things all the time.
Yeah.
They have this little special interest group that they go vote on these off-cycle elections, and they're able to control the outcome.
Yeah. So, and my whole point in that was, even if you're homeschooling, private schooling, or whatever, still go testify at the school board. Encourage your local school boards to become fans of school choice for every reason that Corey and Joseph already said. It does benefit the local public school. They will have an increase in per pupil funding. It will relieve some of this pressure on the new buildings that they're scrambling to build. It's good for everybody. And if they really care about the kids in their community, and there's a better option for that particular kid, maybe it's an art school for music or whatever it is, that they're able to spend more time in their passion and what God's called them to, then your local school board should be for that. And if not, run for the local school board as we're working towards getting school choice done. So that's one thing, is just being more involved locally on your particular school board. But you've got to let these legislators know this is an absolute issue for you. This is a litmus test issue for you. I've said for 20 years this ought to be the number one. I mean, obviously life is all of our number one issue, but Republicans are already there on life, and they're voting with us on life. For me, this is the litmus test. If a legislator is not willing to support school choice, I'm against them. I'm working against them, especially in the primary. Let your legislator know that you are watching what they're going to do in this legislative session, and that this is the number one issue you're watching for. And if they're not with us for getting our kids out of these indoctrination grooming camps, then they are not for us, and we will be against them in the next election.
Well, and it's a political winner. I mean, this is a no-brainer for Republicans to go all in on educational freedom, because it's becoming a form of political suicide for elected officials to come out against parental rights in education. We saw what happened with Terry McAuliffe in Virginia, a state that went 10 points to Biden the year before. Swung
had all the
12 points
easy to cheat things for the election, too, and we still beat them.
Yeah, and Glenn Youngkin won that election on the issue of education. It was the number 2 issue in the election, and he won with those voters by 6 points, whereas he won overall by 2 points. So parents are this new special interest group in town, and they aren't going away anytime soon. We're seeing this play out all across the country, too. I mean, for the first time ever, a poll that was released by the teachers union, actually, Randy Weingarten, who I've said her name probably too many times, had released a poll in battleground states finding Republicans up on the issue of education. That has basically never happened. This was from a left-leaning poll as well. If you look at Gallup in 2017, Democrats were up on education by about 18 percentage points. So this is a seismic shift in support towards Republicans on the issue of education. Why? Probably because they're pushing to become the parents' party. But they can't just talk about it, they gotta be about it. They have to actually support policies that truly empower parents. And the only way to truly secure parental rights in education is to fund the student directly and allow families to have a choice. You can't truly empower parents just with these other measures that are signaling support for parents. You have to actually truly empower them, and the way to do that is school choice. And particularly for Republicans, I think it is becoming a litmus test issue. The support is so high. It's even high among Democrats too, though. If you look at the latest Real Clear Opinion Research polling, there's supermajority support for school choice in 2022 among Republicans, Democrats, and independents. There's majority support in Texas among Democrats and independents and Republicans, with 70% support according to the latest University of Texas at Tyler polling. Greg Abbott just tweeted that out just a couple of days ago as well. So there's so much support for this, and the GOP has a golden opportunity to become the parents' party, and the Republicans in Arizona just showed them how it's done. So hopefully they do the same thing here in Texas and have an even bigger one. There's 5 million students in Texas or more? This would be even bigger than the Arizona victory, which was just the biggest school choice victory in U.S. history. Texas can claim that title just because of its size.
We don't like being second. We've been, yeah.
Joseph, I'm gonna give you the last word. This panel is entitled "What Parents and Kids Need to Know About School Choice." What do they need to know? Bottom line.
For me, if parents need to know that this is the root of all of it. Our primary job as parents is to disciple our children. Whatever financial savings, time savings, hobby savings that we think we obtain by just outsourcing it to the most convenient option, it's not worth it. You think private education or starting in school is expensive? try losing your kid's soul. That's even more expensive. And that really is what at stake. And then the trickle down of that to the country, when you have lost you've lost generation after generation of children's souls, that's really, really expensive. And we're starting to see that. So is this gonna be hard work? You bet it is. But there is nothing we could do that is more important.
Joseph Backholm, Corey Deangelis, Rick Green. Let's give them a big hand, guys. Thank them for coming out here. Thank you, gentlemen.